Agriculture. We're very privileged to have a very special guest with us today. His name is Stockwell Day. He's actually from Canada. I'll read just a little bit of information about him. Mr. Day is the official leader of the opposition party, a key figure in Canadian government for over 25 years. Mr. Day has served in multiple high-level roles, including Minister of Public Safety and Minister of International Trade under Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He has been elected 9 times across provincial and federal levels and brings a wealth of leadership experience and global perspective. I was privileged to hear you yesterday at OPAC. You were supposed to get 3 minutes. I think you got 15, something of that nature.
They were very generous.
They were very generous, and Bob asked some good questions, and you really had some great answers. And then we went to KQCV and had an absolutely excellent interview there with Joseph, who's the manager at KQCV. So learned a little bit about you. You have a tremendous record and a tremendous perspective in Canada. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about here is, I think maybe to start it off, when Trudeau resigned, there was going to be a special election to fill his place. And there was a very conservative candidate who was up in the polls by 25%. And President Trump gets elected, and he starts this joke about Canada becoming the 51st state. They somehow tied this conservative candidate with Trump, and he ended up losing that election. I think you know this gentleman. Why don't you tell us really what happened there and give us some information about the gentleman that lost?
Sure, happy to do it. You've got a good grasp of what took place there, and I do know the person you're talking about who lost, as they say. His name is Pierre Poilievre. He was at the time and still is the leader of the Federal Conservative Party. Actually, he worked for me a number of years ago.
Okay.
When I was leader of the opposition.
Okay.
I brought him to Ottawa as an intern, and it's a super smart guy, great guy. And he gradually, he ran for office himself, became elected, eventually became leader of the Federal Conservative Party. So you've capitalized it quite well. Mainstream media, as in the United States, is significantly culturally Marxist. In Canada, significantly left-leaning. And they literally, most of them, with a few notable exceptions, they just can't tolerate the thought that there could be a significant percentage of Canadians who are actually conservative thinking. Mm-hmm. But in the election, which took place, in the Canadian election, not long before this other incident with President Trump, in the election, the Conservatives got the most votes.
Okay.
But just as the seats break down,
okay,
they didn't win. But we kept the Liberals from getting a majority. And yeah, so there was a sleight of hand that went on. As Conservatives, we take a pragmatic view about the United States. We see ourselves as great historical allies. Most of us as Conservatives don't panic at the word American. Mm-hmm. We look at our past, we say we've got a great past together, we've always had differences of opinion,
yeah,
and we duke it out. We negotiate. I was also Minister of International Trade, would negotiate with your trade representative, and that's kind of the way it was. But there is a latent anti-American sentiment in Canada. It's always sort of brooding under the surface there. And the media were able to quickly capitalize on that by suggesting that the Conservatives weren't being tough enough on the bad orange man. And that wound up, so the new guy, who was not really new to Canada, Prime Minister Carney, was the head of the Bank of Canada, and then he was head of the Bank of England for a while. And Justin Trudeau was the Liberal leader at the time. Mm-hmm. And he had gone from being very popular when he got first elected to becoming very unpopular.
Yes, thank goodness.
And and the media was panicking. They're saying, "Oh my goodness, these Conservatives could win." This gave the great opportunity to paint Pierre Poilievre as not being sufficiently anti-Trump, and I would say Prime Minister Carney takes the traditional Liberal view in Canada over more than a century of being distinctly anti-American, and that combination turned it around.
What would you say his future is?
For Pierre Poilievre?
Yes.
Well, he's in a difficult spot right now because, as you may have seen, we've got this situation in Canada where it's called crossing the floor, which happens from time to time. Basically, it would be like a Republican suddenly declaring that they're a Democrat. And they can do that in Canada without having to get to a special election.
Okay.
Simply, as we say it, they simply cross the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been, I think, 5 floor crossings now. That basically happens when you have a member of parliament. They look at the fact that they just barely got elected in the previous election as Conservative, but it was close. And now they see Liberals up in the polls, and they think, if I want to get re-elected, I don't know if I can get re-elected as a Conservative.
cross the floor.
So they cross the floor.
Never heard of such a thing.
Yeah, it's a remarkable
That happens in Canada too? I thought it was only in the US.
But this is, it gets people quite upset because you vote in a constituency or a riding basis, you vote for someone of a particular party, and then they bail on you without an election or a special election. But it's giving Mr. Carney what he needs in terms of majority in the government to do the things he needs to do. So I would say the support for Pierre Poilievre, because I know quite a few of the members of Parliament are Conservative, is strong. Support for him is strong across the country, but when you get members of Parliament on your team leaving, it always puts you in a tenuous position.
So the constituency that you mentioned, what percentage of Canada is Conservative and what percentage is Liberal? And I'm sure it depends on the parts of Canada that we're talking about.
That's a great observation. Parts of Western Canada tend to be more small c Conservative in their thinking and in their voting, though I mean, it's not exclusively that way, and with the right circumstances, as Stephen Harper, the previous Conservative Prime Minister, showed, you can put together a coalition. It really has a lot to do. The Liberals have to be seen disfavorably in the polls, and in Canada, you know, if you look back over several elections, the election is decided by the undecided, quite honestly.
Okay.
And the undecided can be anywhere from, let's say, 6% to maybe 9% of the voting population. People who are undecided, I will say respectfully, they make up their minds on issues based on the last person they talk to.
Yep.
And the last people that the undecided hear from before they go to vote is mainstream media. And so the undecided...
Which is Liberal, I'm sure.
Distinctly Liberal,
Yes.
significantly Liberal.
Very similar
Actually,
to ours.
Yeah, very similar. Actually, I call it truly defined as culturally Marxist.
Okay.
And they don't like that termination,
No, but it
but
fits.
they are. And so you've got picture, you know, close election in Canada as in the US. The elections, the final result tends to be somewhat close, and 6 to 9% will easily decide who's going to get in. So here you've got this maybe 6% of people going to vote. They're undecided. The last they hear from to be informed by mainstream media. That undecided vote tends to break in favor of the Liberals and then gives them enough to eke out a win.
Do you have an alternative media in Canada like we do here, where we have Fox News, we have conservative talk radio, there's some other news entities also, and then we have organizations that have their own contact information. For example, Bob and I are both members of the John Birch Society,
Sure.
which is the most virulent anti-communist, pro-Americanist organization in America. We have many members and means of communicating with them. So my point is, what do you have in a way of alternative media to the mainstream media there?
Yeah, it's a great question. We do have some very good so-called alternate media, which tend to take a more, I would say, a more democratic view and a more small c conservative view. So you've got Rebel News, which would be known to Canadians and actually internationally. You've got Juno, you've got Western Standard. There's a number of very good, if people want an alternate view. Yeah, but the prevailing view, again, that sways those undecided tend to be the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is funded by the government, which is sort of interesting. Somewhat, some similarities to what you might call your NPR. And
Which we're getting ready to get rid of.
yes, I think that's a good move, because I don't think media outlets should be financed by government.
Yes.
I think the history of certainly Europe, if not communism itself, speaks to that issue. But they do mainstream media gets heavily funded by government. The national, the CBC, depending on the report you look at, could be close to $1 billion.
Wow.
So that gives them a real leg up over regular media, who has to fund their own, pay for their own reporters, pay for their own equipment, etc. So that's kind of the media field in Canada.
Well, these two will have questions for you in a minute. I've had a little advantage because of having heard you yesterday. I want to do one more thing, and then I'm sure they'll jump in here. You talked about
That's
your
a good
heritage.
That's a good.
You talked about your heritage yesterday when your family came over here, and one side of the family went one way and the other side went the other way.
Right.
Would you go ahead and explain that?
Sure, our history dates back to, I mean, among other ancestral background, the UK, Great Britain as it was known, it still is, and both sides of the family came over with basically the Mayflower crowd, and I used to sort of, when my parents would say that, I'd say, really? And anyway, we did the ancestry research, found out it to be true. Anyway, so everything was fine up until it came time to your own revolution and getting close to independence. And my mother's side of the family, as I tell people, liked to be governed by unelected people, the monarchy. And they seemed to like paying high taxes and not have representation, so that made them natural Canadians, I guess.
There's plenty of Americans who really enjoy paying high taxes. Now they'll say they don't, but in reality, they're good with big government.
Yeah, and you know what? We taxes are needed. There's needed to some degree of taxation, but when it came time to stand up to that, my mother's side of the family moved north with a group, and it's known in Canada as the United Empire Loyalists. They wanted to be loyal to the crown, and the high tax thing didn't bother them as much. My father's side of the family was more what became, the American side. They didn't want the unelected monarch, and they didn't like paying high taxes, so they stayed and fought. And that sort of, I tell people politically, I'm a little bit schizophrenic because they've got that, United Empire Loyalists. We still kind of like the monarchy. I don't think the monarchy should have sway over public voting, etc. But
it's an internal struggle there, isn't it?
yes, it's an internal, and all of our political development then through the 1700s and 1800s was, here's a great way of saying it. I tell people, Americans, and you have it written in, at the forefront is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's strong terminology.
Right.
I can see people going to battle on those to defend those type of things. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. The equivalent in Canada is peace, order, and good government. Okay,
And
so
that's official.
that's official.
That's
But I tell it to Americans,
Yeah.
they say you don't actually write those words down. You don't actually say those things. And so that, I think it helps to characterize the difference. So our political development through the late 1700s into the 1800s was the development of what we called responsible government, maybe somewhat snobbishly, but it was a gradual proving to the crown we could do this. We could run our lives in Canada. I mean, there are a lot of other political realities at play. And so this development of responsible government, where more and more power was ceded to what we were beginning to call Canada, resulted then in 1867. We actually formed our own nation and formed a constitution, but there was still a lot of reflection towards Great Britain, towards certain constitutional monarch realities. And so it was a slow, we call it slow responsible progress, without an actual revolution. We had our skirmishes, and then of course skirmishes with the U.S. You folks came up in the 1800s there and burned down some of our buildings in Toronto, and we got mad and we came back down and we captured Washington D.C. and burned down the White House.
Oh, is that the war of 1812?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of Americans don't understand it was the U.S. that initiated that war by invading Canada. Is that the case?
Yeah, they launched it. Yeah.
Did y'all hear that?
So that was a
It
U.S.
was a Canadian that informed me of this.
That was a U.S. push, and of course there were other realities going on. The UK was making certain claims on territory in North America, and France was also making those claims. France, of course, was more sided with the province of Quebec into the Canadian reality. So you know, a bunch of British soldiers and early Canadians and even some of our First Nations folks came down to Washington, burned down the White House without the ballroom in it, and then we kind of said.
Now, the King was here just recently, and he said it was their attempt to remodel the White House.
Right. And he was, you know, Canada was sort of watching the King very carefully, and he knew this because Canadians didn't want to see him, you know, caving to the U.S. because he's sort of our king.
Yes.
I thought it was fascinating, and I liked it actually, when he spoke, which he did.
Yes.
He spoke to the joint session, right?
Yes.
And he got applause, which I think was worthy.
Yeah.
But by the Democrats, who are on the side of saying no kings, no
Trump
kings.
had something to say about that.
Yeah, and here they were applauding our kings. So in Canada, we kind of smiled at that, and we said, well, maybe the Americans aren't as anti-king as we thought. But that's our history. So we evolved. Canadians would say a more gradually, incrementally, without a revolution.
I understand there's
the US
possibly a province or two, like maybe Alberta, that's at least discussing the possibility of leaving Canada and becoming a state in the United States. Is there any truth to that?
There is some. Let me put that in perspective. Alberta and provincially, I served as Alberta's Minister of Finance.
Did you start that revolution there?
No.
The financing.
I maybe looked it up, but I didn't start, no. I did bring in Canada's only flat tax, so that was seen as somewhat of a revolutionary. But on that note, the grievances that Alberta especially has with the federal government go back for decades.
Okay.
Way back as far as the 30s, Alberta arguably was suffering more than any other province, certainly more than what we call Eastern or Central Canada.
Right.
And everything Alberta tried to do to get on its own feet, we weren't begging for subsidies, we were just saying, let us do a few
Leave us
things.
alone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And in the eyes of Albertans, and there's some historical evidence of this, the federal government, either whether it was conservative or liberal, continued to squash the aspirations of Albertans to pursue things in a little different way. And that has just continued nonstop. So the grievances with many Albertans toward Ottawa or the federal government are real.
Mm-hmm.
And I share those grievances. Some people feel that departing or becoming independent or separatist or seceding from Canada is the answer. Quebec tried it. Quebec has always had a strong separatist
They
movement.
wanted to be
as you know.
French, right?
Right. Well, Quebec wanted to be their own.
Their own nation.
Yeah. And that's a whole other story, interesting development that have gone there. But they did have a vote on that in Quebec in the 90s.
It was close, wasn't it?
Like 0.5%.
Yeah.
Was the difference between them not achieving that. So there's a growing number of people in Alberta who want independence and want to be separate. Not necessarily saying become part of the U.S., but become separate. There'd be a small part of that percentage that would say maybe we should join the U.S., but most would be, no, Alberta, independent. And the position I've been taking, it makes some of my conservative friends not happy who would, let's say, be more strongly separatist. I've said, look, if that vote succeeded, then what you would have in Canada, because with the way we have it set up constitutionally, would be protracted years and years of court cases. You would have people who don't want to secede, in spite of the vote, they would launch court cases, your First Nations and Indigenous groups, and there's already a case going on with that just recently. And whenever you have a political entity where there's, it's not clear what shape they are, you're not gonna get investment coming in, you're not gonna get, you'll have people leave to more stable areas. So I would say I'd be part of the group that would be saying more autonomy as a province. Our constitution does fully recognize provincial, a whole set of provincial rights, so let's press hard for more autonomy. Separatism is gonna be too messy and too destructive economically for too many years. That's my view, and it's not shared by everybody.
Okay. So.
Actually, that was the case when the American colonies broke off from, the UK. Economically, it was quite the challenge for a generation trying to recover.
Huge. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to mention that because that's often cited by people who think that Alberta would be okay economically.
No, it's not going to be smooth. It wouldn't be
But it
smooth.
would not be smooth, but the American example is used. You say, look, the Americans did it, and of course there's other countries around the world that did it.
Sure.
Have done it successfully. So, it's timely you asked that question because very recently a judge has just ruled that the province of Alberta and its Premier Daniel Smith, who's solid small C conservative, she actually does a great job. She's saying, okay, bring it, you want the vote, there's actually a legal way, you get enough signatures in the province, you can actually bring that to a vote. And a judge just ruled that the way those who want separatism, the way they went about it, ignored certain First Nations consultations, technical things, and so this judge has struck that down. So that's got the separatist side even angrier, and they say, look, there's just one more example of why we should get out of here.
Right.
So we'll see where that goes, but I think it eventually will come to a vote. My guess is it won't get 50%, but I don't know, as the federal government becomes more and more odious in terms of their policies, I don't know, it could be close.
So you have First Nations problems in Canada just like we do in the United States.
We have challenges for sure, and sometimes media clumps all of First Nations groups into one entity, and they're very different. Just as provinces are different, states are different.
Yes.
I deal with many First Nations groups and their leaders. When I was serving as a member of Parliament in British Columbia, just in my own constituency, I had 19 separate First Nations groups. I actually helped one of them to develop legislation for self-government. Not government that would supersede Canadian government, but self-government. And you can travel from one First Nations group to another. Some are very successful. They are very business-oriented, career-oriented. They strike partnerships with businesses and companies who are not First Nation. In those cases, they want 51% of a business operation, which they should. But they're very successful. The media tends to focus just on the ones who are not that successful, who are constantly in a state of conflict among themselves and others. But so even First Nations are like any other governments. There's some that work very well and they take very good care and form very good partnerships. And there are others who don't.
Well,
Conflict makes good news, right? When you're trying to increase your viewership, that's where you end up going. Charlie, I cut you off.
Yeah, I was going to say in Oklahoma, we're blessed with 39 federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma, and all of them believe that they are sovereign nations.
Yes.
And they're pushing the boundary continually to see just how sovereign they are.
Yes.
And but they have all kinds of advantages, tribally owned businesses and tribal members over non-tribally owned businesses and non-tribal members in Oklahoma. And it makes for something very, very interesting here.
Well, it does. So you've got 39, so picture Canada is about 600 First Nations.
Yeah.
Each one sees themselves, understandably, as their own nation, as their own governing body. And that can present a labyrinth of challenges and difficulties. But again, I point to some who have established great cooperative business working relationships in which, as we know, in a market economy, everybody actually can win. It's not, as the Marxists claim or as the Socialists claim, you've got winners and losers. There can be arrangements that are struck that are beneficial to all sides, and I've been involved negotiating a number of those and with business partners who have those. And that to me is the best way to go, because then everybody can benefit. But they do see themselves as their own government, and Canadian law has recognized that. So it makes for some fascinating dealings.
In 2018, my wife and I spent a good deal of time in Western Canada and Alaska. And the Can-Am Highway, it was explained to us that one of the reasons that Canada was so agreeable to help in that is it was a pretty sparsely populated part of the country at that time, and they were a little bit afraid that the United States might just annex that part of Canada. I don't know if you ever heard that story or not, but that's what we had heard. So they wanted to very much participate in that and try to hold off any possible effort of being annexed by the United States.
I think people always have a bit of a view to that in a protected way. Sometimes it's not a majority view, but the Can-Am Highway, or used to be called the Alcan Highway, wonderful. I mean, highways that are your famous Route 66 here. I think it's your 100th anniversary of Route 66. Allows for the movement of people and the movement of trade, the movement of product. My wife and I lived in the Arctic for a year, way up in Nunavik, above the Arctic Circle. And when we lived there at the time, there was actually no highway. You either came in.
The Dempster Highway wasn't there at the time.
Correct, it was not. It was being built, but it wasn't there. So in the winter you flew in, and in the summer you flew in, and winter travel up there in that region was all on the ice roads. No, highways are great and wonderful, and they do link people, and as long as you have good friendships, then their highways are important linkages for sure.
Sure. Yeah, and trade routes. It's kind of interesting.
Trade, yeah.
Okay, if I join in?
Sure, go ahead, jump in. I've been waiting for you.
And I've been patiently waiting for you to run out of questions.
Oh, I'm not
Have you noticed how I tend to do that? All right. So I have a couple questions for you, and I'm sure Aya has some as well. It's interesting, the parallels, the way you describe the conservative liberals in the United States versus Canada, and the strong influence of Marxism, and I would dare to say it creeps quite a bit even into those who would call themselves conservatives. It's amazing how many of the 10 planks of communism have been implemented in the United States, and conservatives, those who would call themselves conservatives, will actually defend it. And within the U.S., those who call themselves conservatives are actually, it's a split group. Okay, it's a very split group. And every time big issues come up, you see this interesting dynamic going back and forth. For example, I don't want to get into this as a topic, but the war with Iran. Okay, it can be very divisive, all right, with various views on that. Now, in relation to just North America, the Northern Hemisphere, allow me to bring this up as an example. We all know about Trump's comments about, Canada, 51st state and all. And now that would be a divisive question within the U.S. in a conservative movement, the whole idea of...
Absolutely, being against that.
Yeah, well, yeah, and many would, right? But others would be okay with it, within the conservative circles. So it's kind of interesting. On the other hand, what do Canadians think, conservative Canadians, think of the whole idea of Trump's overtures towards Greenland?
Most Canadians would look at that as unnecessarily invasive. The majority of Canadians would see that, just as I can tell you the vast majority of Canadians have no interest in Canada becoming a 51st state, though Canadians unfortunately are, from our point of view, Canada's point of view, moving to the U.S. because they don't think they have the financial and economic freedoms that would be available to them to run their businesses, to be productive, to be innovative. So they would generally side, and most people don't fully understand, the relationship, Greenland, Denmark, geographically, how Greenland is very important from a geopolitical point of view, especially if you're looking at defense.
Right.
And you're looking at the ability...
Which is what Trump's doing.
Yeah.
Well, defense and trade routes,
Yes.
they're both equations.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So it's a key point. So Canadians would probably say, yeah, he should stay out of there. And that would sort of be the view. But Canadians would be able to view that Greenland is strategically an important place, especially if you're looking at defending the continent and ballistic missiles coming over and as a trade
Right.
route. So most Canadians would generally say, yeah, Trump should take a different approach to that.
Okay.
So would the more liberals in the US not welcome Canada being a part of us, cause we pull in a whole bunch of liberals?
But we know what it would do to our Senate and our, more particularly our US House of Representatives.
Yeah.
Just like Venezuela, which he's talking about making Venezuela our 51st state now. And if you did that, you'd have 2
We'd have to go
Democrat
have a revival
senators
over there.
and almost all the
We'd
US
have to
reps.
send half of Logan County's conservatives to Venezuela to do some work.
I'll tell you, from my perspective, it truly would decimate the U.S. and the
Yeah.
balance that we have
Yes.
right now.
Yeah.
Right? It's not and again, just my perspective.
Yeah.
Even the idea of bringing in Greenland, you know, just totally opposed to it. I'd
Yes.
rather have if anything, a more distributed form of governance that compete with each other, you know, for resources and people. Sir, you mentioned the idea of Canadians moving to the U.S. because they feel like it would have better financial opportunities. Well, we have a version of that between the states here in the United States. I hear legislators at the Oklahoma State Capitol talking about Texas, they have no income tax and it's eating us up. How do we compete? And I think this is great because now they've got to figure out how to be sensitive to the population, provide a better environment, and I would suggest that means reducing the size of government and letting people have more liberty so they can do as they will, right, with their own time and resources. And that competition between governments is healthy. So I agree with you. The idea of like Greenland, no, don't make it another state, or even Venezuela. Okay, not at all. Let them float around and work that out. But it's not. That thought is not shared by everybody, and it's definitely not shared by the Marxists because they like the idea of the gradual concentration of power throughout the world and to control it. Okay, it's just one of those tenets of communism. So it's and I don't know what to do with that thought on Greenland, but Canadians would really they would lean away from the idea of Trump, the U.S. getting more involved in Greenland.
Definitely, yeah. They want to see Greenland protected. They want to see Greenland being strong to be there as a bulwark against, let's say, Russian expansion or attacks coming over, literally coming over the globe, over the pole.
Whether it be
but
North
yeah.
Korea or China or
Right.
Russia or wherever.
Right.
So that's what Canadians would be opposed to that. But on your other point, which is fair and valid, the United States is drawn up constitutionally, as is Canada, to agree where you have provinces, you have states. One of the advantages of that, you get it's like they're like laboratories. So
Yes.
you get the
Laboratories of
opportunity.
freedom is what we call it.
Exactly. So you get to see, for instance, a province that wants to zero in on lower taxes, let's say, and less government. Then over time, you can get to see they've got a more vibrant economy, property values are lower, cost of living is lower, and then people can make choices. But socialists or centrists or cultural Marxists hate that. Because they feel that government should be, in fact, controlling everything as a Marxist principle. And so in Alberta, when I was introduced the flat tax there,
Which I love that idea, by the way. Is it still flat tax there?
no, true to form, when the socialist form government in Alberta, for a brief period of time, they took it out. And,
There's your laboratory of democracy at work there,
Yeah.
right, Charlie?
That's a whole other story. But it gives the opportunity for people to compare. So, and it's the same with states that have either no state income tax or no sales tax. People have the chance to compare. And then if you want to live in an area that's more, let's say, culturally Marxist, higher taxes, less decision-making power for individuals, you can do that, and you don't have to force it. But when you have governments bringing in policies that crush those differences, that's where you have that's where you're going to get pushback, and rebellion. So a true Marxist, of course, on the issue of taxes. And you see it, as you know, at the United Nations, there's this constant thing of, and it's in place to a degree.
Yeah, and you're supposed to, when you mention the United Nations, there's supposed to be a word that goes before an adjective. The evil United Nations.
Well, I think the United Nations in some ways may have served a purpose in its past. I think it's largely counterproductive. I think there's other ways you can put together groups of countries and achieve good things for people who are affected. But they want to bring in this notion of a sort of a minimum tax internationally.
Yeah, they would love
And they
it.
say, well, because if you don't, and I love this phrase, and you hear it in the media, when a state begins to lower its taxes, they say this is terrible. It's a race to the bottom. You hear that all the time.
Oh, really? Race to the bottom,
It's
man.
a race to the bottom. No, it's called a race to individual financial freedom, is what I call it.
Yes,
And culturally Marxists, people who are more statist, they hate that.
yes.
Because it allows individuals to be more productive and to be more innovative. And again, back just closing out that thought on your point, the importance of provinces or states having differences
Right.
in ways they administrate
Yes.
what they do gives people a chance to sit back and say, well, do I want to live in an area that's more heavily governed?
Yes.
My cost of living will be higher, my opportunities for my kids will be lower, but some people want that. They want that. Some people like to be governed by governments,
Yeah,
and
they
some
do.
people don't.
It's almost this, it's a biased way of putting it on my part, but it's almost a difference between statism, you know, how do you put this? Peace, order, good government, right? There's something to be said about that. Versus the idea of dangerous liberty. Because if you have all kinds of liberty, you're on your own. You're on your own. You make a mistake, you suffer the consequences. It's not absorbed by your neighbors and you eat that night, right? It is dangerous liberty, which I'm into, by the way, sir. I'm into all the way.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one more question, and that is the whole idea of Canada, you know, just geographically, is between two significant components of the U.S., Alaska and then the lower 48. The Canadians have thoughts on that idea. Or what do they think of Alaska?
Generally speaking, it's sort of benign. Alaskans, especially if you're talking about people in British Columbia and parts of Alberta, because they're pretty close neighbors. So, you know, well, I guess most Canadians would say Alaskans are cool. You know,
Yeah.
that's fine. And
So it's rather harmonious, not really a problem.
oh no, it's harmonious for sure. We have cruises are very popular out of Vancouver up to Alaska.
You're here.
Yeah, well, there's I would say there's pretty high level of friendship, and especially as you move into northern British Columbia, because you have much more open, the wild, the forest, the fishing, the hunting. There's some common values there. So yeah, there's not really problems between the two. People generally get along pretty well.
All right, now there's now one last question. I'll let you have your shot.
Don't ever let them tell you that women talk more than men.
Well, isn't that a great? I'm glad I'm somewhere comfortable you've raised that.
Give Ian a moment. Give Ian a moment.
We
I understand your
have
wife is quite eloquent and can communicate a lot.
she anything that I ever say that is smart and well thought out is because she instructed me on it. She actually has a book coming out.
I was gonna ask you about that.
Yeah, it's called Grandma's Guide to Raising Kids.
Grams?
Grandma's Guide
Oh,
to
okay.
Raising Kids.
I tried to find it.
Oh,
That's interesting.
it's not quite released yet. We're just finishing up some of the stuff with the publishers right now. But yeah, my wife's a really super smart woman. She's really the political one. She doesn't like the rough and tumble of politics, but she's a lot smarter and wiser on some of this stuff
Wow.
than
Yeah,
I am, and I have to.
And-
Any
In
mistakes?
her quietness, she feels the same way.
Yeah, and sometimes she's not quite about it.
I'll tell
No, I
you,
tell
the rocks
people-
the cradle runs the world, controls the world.
Well, right. I tell people any mistakes I've made in politics or in life is because it was my idea. The smart things I've done.
Where's my husband?
Smart things I've done usually because it was my wife's idea,
Yeah.
or she would say, "Yeah, that's a good way to go," or "That's a dumb way to go." And anytime I chose the dumb way, that was mine, and
Well,
I made a few of those choices.
And researching you before this podcast, I saw where she accompanies you to most of your political events or campaigns or.
Yeah, well, she's
Interesting.
just, she's very good at analyzing people, and she's got good instincts on that, and she's incredible organizationally too. You know, she's key to all of my campaigns. And people genuinely like her on both sides of the, she's solid conservative, but when we were serving in Ottawa, she was the president for 5 years of what's called the Parliamentary Spouses Association.
Okay.
So that would be spouses, either male or female, and she also worked with the diplomatic corps, and both sides. You know, she's a kind and a loving person, but she can be very tough, and yeah, she's got that.
Well, I think that fed well into your campaigning, would it not?
It did, yeah. It helped a lot. Matter of fact, there was one point in which we were having, in terms of Canada, we were having this dispute with China because the Dalai Lama was coming to Canada to meet with the Prime Minister. That was upsetting to China
Sure.
because of Tibet and all of that. And the ambassador was furious with me. I was Minister of International Trade at the time, and I had done some things with trade-wise. And he said, "You can't let the Dalai Lama come into Canada." And I said, "Mr. Ambassador, we're a democracy. And if the Dalai Lama wants to come to Canada and the Prime Minister wants to meet him, then he's going to meet him." And
Was this the ambassador from China?
yes, the ambassador
Okay.
from China.
Yes, right.
As a matter of fact, so the visit was approved. China was so furious with their ambassador, they thought it was his fault. They pulled him out of there. They dragged him back to China. I never heard from him since. I hope he's okay.
Oh,
But,
Nor did anyone else ever.
right. But right at the time, my wife was saying, "Oh, we're doing this fashion show with China and the embassy and the ambassador's wife." And I said, "No, you can't, because we're having a fight with China right now." And she said, "Well, I'm not." You know. And so she went ahead and they organized, and members of Parliament from all sides of the House came to this huge fashion show, and even MPs were, you know, showing Canadian fashion and Chinese fashion. And so
Yeah.
I tell people she stopped the Canada-China war
War.
that was about to break out. But no, she's got that ability to, you know, maintain her principles, but
Right.
still work with people in a
Yes.
human way.
That's a high quality, it really
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
Sir, talking about Canada, the U.S. has a, you know, how you want to describe it, love-hate relationship with Canada. Okay, and maybe that's a fair way to put it. On the, I'm sorry, love-hate relationship with China.
Yes.
Explain that better, right?
Yeah.
That's really what I meant. Sorry, I take it back with Canada. Okay, all right.
Thanks, you just staved off another war.
It's a love-hate relationship with China, and you can see why. It's good for trade. On the other hand, there are questions of defense and the whole bit. Fair enough. One of the topics that comes up when it comes to China is Chinese citizens or even companies owning land in the United States.
Yeah.
And some of the states are actually pushing back and saying no foreign ownership, you know, or for what they perceive as hostile nations. All right, to put it that way.
There's a
And
strong emphasis in Oklahoma on that.
Yeah, there is. I was about to bring out that point. Oklahoma is one of the states where that topic is working its way through and being discussed. Now, on the other hand, I hear this undertow of thought, and I'm hoping you correct me on this, or put the record straight, about Chinese having a much greater influence over Canada. You know, in the U.S. worry about Canadian or the Chinese owning land next to military bases, and the surveillance that can occur there, details like that. And yet, Americans view China as having a greater influence over Canada and a larger presence. Is that the case, or what does that actually look like?
Well, great question. Just on the land issue, over the last decade or two, there's considerable pushback in Canada, especially British Columbia, about Chinese or Asian ownership of land, and how that can be a distortion on prices. So that's been a whole issue. Canada has been generally, I would say, softer towards China over many decades. That's historic. It goes back a long time, and to a level which I think it can be concerning. And right now, Prime Minister Carney the leader of the Liberal Party, is sending very clear signals. He says, I don't share this view, he says that the relationship with the U.S. Is not good, and so we're going to be more aligning with China. And at the same time, and the point I've been making and others is, you must be calling out China on their human rights record, the fact that their estimates are up to 1 million Muslims, the Uyghur population in China, that are under various forms of confinement, that China has some policies that are not democratic, that we don't share at all. But liberals as a party tend to be more, let's say, China friendly, less willing to bring those topics up, even publicly. On my own podcast, Stockwell Day-to-Day News, a little plug there, I was just talking about the fact that we're not publicly, we don't raise concerns. For instance, China could be doing more to stopping the precursors of fentanyl, the elements that you use to make fentanyl,
which
get
is
shipped to Canada.
a point of discussion right now while President Trump is over there.
Quite right. So I had just published a thing a couple of days ago on this, saying we've got to be more vocal to China if we're drawing closer to them and say we don't like this. We have Canadian people, addicts, mainly young people, dying in awful numbers because of fentanyl, and of course it happens in the U.S. And so here, 2 days before I was raising that, the Prime Minister, or sorry, your President, as I see with President Xi, he's raised that. He's raised it publicly.
Sure.
He's saying, we don't like the fact that these precursors made of fentanyl that's killing Americans. Well, we don't like it that it's killing Canadians. But the federal Liberals seem less reluctant to raise those issues. They say they do it quietly, but it's making some of us in Canada a bit nervous, saying that we're going to be snuggling closer to China. I can tell you that will have security ramifications. I was Minister of Public Safety, which is your equivalent to Homeland Security, and I can tell you, having spent time at the CIA and another in doing information sharing, American, let's just say, intelligence information will be shared less with countries that they view are drawing too close to China. Let's say, heavily communist China, countries like China. So I'm worried about that we're not going to get the same level of information sharing from our friends, the Five Eyes, as we sometimes call it, of which U.S. is key. So we have to be sending that message also as Canadians, the Canadian government, to the Americans, that we understand the concerns. We do understand China is a communist nation. All of China's intentions around the world are not benign.
That's right.
They are and have been gaining huge areas of influence around the world by coming in and building infrastructure for those countries, and then those countries are indebted, and we've got to, I believe,
the Roads and Bridges program or whatever it is.
Yeah, the Belt and Road Initiative I've been talking about for years. I'd come back from China, did many visits there, and I would say, look, China is having huge inroads, using the word road, in many nations because of this, and we've got to be circumspect about it. We've got to be aware. So, yeah, our relationship with China is a concern. I understand that with the U.S., and we need to be careful and mindful of that.
You don't think they kind of modeled that after the IMF and the World Bank? I mean, basically, wasn't that model done by the West before the Chinese did it, with the whole idea of getting nations in debt?
Well, yeah, indebtedness, which is promised, actually, you go back in terms of ancient history and ancient writings. I like to quote from, we call it the Old Testament, but also Jewish scriptures, talk about countries that are willing to follow, let's call it biblical principles or godly principles, there'll be certain positive results of that. One of them is that you're not hopelessly in debt. And so being cautious and being careful on the types of policies we have is really important, and will have a bearing on our strength even as a nation.
The United States is facing an unbelievable debt problem right now. It is an existential threat to our nation if we don't get it under control, in my estimation anyway. I would like to take it a little different direction here, because there was a time that Canada was very friendly to Israel. And I think you're concerned about a change in that friendliness. And you've actually been to Israel several times. You've met with Bibi several times. You did a documentary about that recently,
Yes.
Particularly shortly after Hamas
Right.
did what they did. Could you share a little bit about that?
Sure, happy to do that, and then people can find the documentary at stockwellday.com. Actually, it's interesting. YouTube didn't like certain parts of it. They suppressed certain parts of the documentary.
Imagine that.
When I'm talking about the extreme violence that was perpetrated on October 7th, it's very interesting just in the news today, in American news, it's talking about the very distinct, deliberate use of the most vicious forms of violence possible. And what, this isn't Israel talking about, it's the Palestinian planners themselves saying they deliberately, I mean, I don't even like to talk about it publicly, it's so odious, but if you look on the documentary, where I'm interviewing at the Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, a woman who's been a surgeon there for years, she's head of many of the women reproductive programs, etc., and she said that some of the first ones coming in from the concert, either the bodies or those who were still alive, they had difficulty identifying if they were male or female. So I just leave that to your listeners' imagination.
Very brutal.
And brutal beyond belief, but
Yeah.
it was not just, these weren't the crazy Palestinians just caught up in it. Well, of course they were, and they were crazy. But it was a deliberate thing to send the message. So on the broader Israel question, even if, set aside the whole religious history of it, Israel is the only democratic nation in a sea of authoritarian states there. So just as people who are Democrats, we should be supporting Israel. It's a joke when I hear the word apartheid applied to Israel. Israel is the only, and I bring up the documentary, you can vote freely. Men and women are treated equally. Gays are not put to death. Arabs, Muslims can run for office in Israel, be in the Knesset, and they are. They can be on the Supreme Court, and they are. They have human rights, and constantly in Israel itself, where there are large Arab communities, especially those that border some of the disputed areas, when they are regularly given the chance to vote to be part of the Palestinian entity, let's call it, or stay in Israel, they all stay in Israel because it's a democracy. And
You call those Palestinian Christians, right?
yes, Palestinian Christian, but also Arabs.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
there are Arab Israelis, quite a few of them. So from the point of view of Israel being a vibrant democracy, then if you tie in, the biblical question, there's no question. Israel has been on that land even long before this notion of Palestinian. What is a Palestinian? That occurred decades later. All historians, whether they are called, let's call it people of faith or not, allude to the fact Israel's foundations go back millennia. As far as the Muslim question, as we know, Muhammad didn't come along until 600 or so, even after the time of Christ. So I am one of those people who would be supportive of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And it's very interesting, I think, to see some of these Arab nations now aligning with Israel. The Abrahamic Accords, which President Trump put into play, because you're dealing with international, culturally Marxist media, they hate the fact that a Muslim nation would even think of aligning with Israel. It drives them crazy, right?
And we're going to see more of that.
Fair number do.
Yeah.
And
And
sir,
we're gonna see more.
allow me to be the devil's advocate and ask me a question, all right? Because I can tend to do
I
that.
have some questions when you guys are finished.
Oh,
I'm just gonna put my number.
allow
I'm
me
going
to
to go ahead and
one.
let you go now.
Well, I've just got
Okay,
one.
okay,
Be the devil's advocate.
okay.
What about the whole
You're
idea?
good at that, Bob.
What about the whole idea of the Nakba? The practice of the Nakba by Israel?
There's so many things that are talked about that really need to be looked at in terms of what actually happened. So, first of all, Israel, though it's almost daily accused of being genocidal, for instance, is not, and has never been. And at the time, 1947, 1948, you have the UN come along, they recognize Israel, they take a vote. It was constitutionally decided at the UN, for what that's worth, that Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state. And then there was this huge movement of people. Many Muslims at the time moved out of Israel because the war was coming. You had a majority in the United Nations of countries vote, yes, Israel had a right to exist. Of course, these Muslim states, especially 5 of them,
Immediately declared war upon.
immediately declared war. So there was a movement of Muslims, not all, but a movement out of Israel. What is never realized also was about 1 million at the time, over 1 million Jewish people in all the nations around there, were told, you either leave or we kill you. They had to absorb, Israel as a brand new nation had to absorb about 1 million people in a very short period of time. So there was no genocide in terms of no massacres. There are terrible things happen in war and on all sides everywhere. And there have been times where Israeli soldiers, either deliberately or accidentally, did things that weren't right. Never at the genocidal level. And many, like people still will talk about something called the Jenin Massacre. And as it was determined even by the United Nations, that never happened. There was never. So you've got these 2 great disputes, as you're referring to, and one is what did happen there in terms of people moving out, and also the Palestinian people saying this was a great disaster. We made a huge mistake. This movement moving out, and they call it the great disaster. Those bridges, I believe, and this is again what people eat, can be rebuilt. I believe you can have, President Trump has actually pointed this out, you can have a strong, vibrant Gazan entity. Not if it's being ruled by Hamas. You cannot have that. And people continue to forget. People say, well, there should be a 2-state solution. Why don't we listen more to Hamas? Hamas does not want a 2-state solution. They have it written, and they show
The
every
river
day.
to the sea.
The river to the sea. They want to kill Jews all the time everywhere, and they want to annihilate Israel. So even if you are, let's say, pro-Palestinian, and when I talk to my pro-Palestinian friends, and I do have pro-Palestinian friends, they can't accept this fact that Hamas is saying, no, it's death to all Jews all the time everywhere. And annihilate Israel. They can't seem to come with that. I think the present path that Israel is on in terms of standing for their borders and defending their borders is something they need to do. And if you could get this Hamas element out, I think there's a great opportunity for prosperity in that Gaza area. It's one of the most beautiful stretches of maritime coastline you're ever going to see.
Hotels and casinos before too long.
Well, no, we talked about that, but it actually could be. It actually could be. But
I think that's Trump's vision for it.
yeah, it is. Yeah, and I think it's actually legitimate. But to do that, then Hamas and the so-called Palestinian movement would have to acknowledge that they actually do not have the right to take over Israel and to annihilate it. And they won't do that. They will die. So it's a challenge, but it's not insurmountable.
All right, I'll quit asking questions that dominate like you normally do.
One of the things
You've
that
got 2 minutes.
stood out was when you mentioned that the Canadians, a lot of them come here to work, and being born and raised in another country that's, a great country, there's still nowhere like America. And that always comes up in our topics of conversation, no matter who we have here. But I do study a lot of the British, Great Britain goings-ons, and I know that Prince William has said that he doesn't want to be the head of the church. So I know you mentioned like the 1847, but really it was like 1982 when you got to where you could write and change your own constitution, correct?
Yes.
So I was kind of comparing that to women's suffrage and like when they started and when a woman actually got to vote, since I'm the feminazi on this panel, but,
Women in voting, we should have a session on that one, Charlie.
but, I was curious about religion in Canada. What is like the main religion? Are you having the same kind of issues there? Probably not to the same level, because I've heard a lot about it as they're having like in London, with the Muslims. What is actually like your daily societal goings-ons in the streets?
Well, the religious question is big. The King Charles, and before him, of course, his mother and every other monarch, part of the description of their job title was still is defender of the faith. That's actually written.
Yeah.
That's one of their chores, to be defender of the faith, which is the Christian faith.
Not
right?
happening.
It's and yeah, it's been noticed that King Charles is taking somewhat of a departure from that, and he's equating the merits of Christianity with the merits of Islam, and it's all the same, and we know it's not.
Right.
And I respect.
That's what you do when you allow too many into your country.
Well, we as conservatives, we want to see freedom of religion. We want people to be able to worship according to the ways they want, but not if it's going to overwhelm what is the existing and historical situation. And in Canada, you have an increasing number of people of Muslim faith, and it is growing. In some areas, it's growing rapidly, and in those areas, you will see, mosques are proliferating. The purchasing of former churches to become mosques. So
Very important for them to do that. That's symbolism.
yeah, it is, and it
mosques.
has to do with assumption of land and everything else. So there has to be this understanding that we do believe in freedom of religion, but until it's been voted differently, as far as the UK goes, their constitution and their monarch system still says that the faith is Christianity, really embodied in Anglicanism and primarily in England. But it's a source of, I would say it's a source of rising tension. Our Prime Minister recently said Muslim values are Canadian values. And so Canadians are just saying, could you define those? Because if you look at Muslim nations, for instance, not allowing women to vote, that's for sure. Literally imprisoning or killing people of different sexual persuasions, that's claims to be part of their faith. Now, in Canada, because that's not the dominant view, that hasn't emerged, but people are quite rightly concerned. And they're concerned about this thing called Sharia law.
Yeah.
Are the Muslims just waiting until they have majorities, and will they then bring in Sharia law?
Yeah, they will.
So I would say it is relatively welcoming in Canada because we do embrace freedom of religion to a degree. And but there is a level of concern, as we can see in every country, where the voting minority does become Muslim, then there's a significant shift in interpretation of what human rights are, a very significant shift. And there's an underlying concern about that for sure.
We had a man on our program recently named Matthew Sullivan, and he was born in Pakistan. He's a Christian. He's read the Quran 12 times, and he knows the Quran better than even some of their clerics. He's personally led over 1,000 Muslims to the Lord and over 200 Hindus to the Lord. But on our program, he explained the strategy of the Muslims. He calls it jihad in America, the strategy of the Muslims to take over America, and then also why so many Christians are converting to Islam. And it's a very, very interesting program. We have a very high viewership of that particular program. And so, but just like the communists are looking for world domination, so are the Muslims. And I see quite a partnership oftentimes with the Muslims and the communists. And certainly that was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem prior to World War II, went to Adolf Hitler, and there were several regiments of Muslims that were wearing Nazi uniforms. And so that's not, Nazism and communism are not exactly the same, but they're totalitarian for sure, both of them. Yeah. Do you have any
No,
other
they're
questions?
sisters.
Yeah.
Good. All
Okay,
right.
go ahead.
You're permitted one more question.
That's okay, go ahead. Bob.
No, I don't have one.
Oh, he doesn't have a question.
No, I
Put
do,
that on
I
the
do,
calendar.
but I've got to give the talkative lady here a chance.
It's all right, I'm good.
Well, on the question, and it's an interesting one, in Canada, if we're gonna use Canada, I would say it's not a case where more people are converting to Islam than to Christianity. When you look worldwide, of course, we hear increasing reports, most of which are validated, about significant numbers of people in Islamic countries converting to Christianity.
Yes.
Certainly in Iran, that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
documented very clearly, very significant numbers
Yes.
of Muslims in Iran that are converting to Christianity. So, we'll watch as that goes. The difficulty and the unease that some people have is, as a country, or if a country becomes majority Muslim, then this thing of freedom of religion disappears.
Right.
With the Muslim entity, because Christians will always say, of course, we advance our faith, and we love the thought of people, coming to Christianity, or as we say, coming to Christ.
Right.
But this is always voluntary. You don't have a law forcing that.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
But in the Muslim nations, you do have laws that suppress every other religion.
That's right.
And it's interesting with Israel. Christianity is growing fastest in the Middle East, in Israel,
Yes.
not in the Muslim nations.
Yes.
In the so-called Palestinian areas, and I've been in there in the West Bank, Christianity has been rapidly decreasing in those areas. Bethlehem had a certain population even when I first started going there and going to Israel, and it is severely diminished, and that is because the Muslim faith demands subjugation. We talk, as Christians, we talk about subjecting our hearts to Jesus Christ.
Right.
That's very different than a government saying, you have to submit to our religion, or you either leave or we kill you. And I visited refugee camps not that long ago, for instance, in Jordan. Refugee camp, 25,000 people. All who had to leave Muslim nations, they were given a choice. You convert or you die. So that's where the big difference is in terms of freedom of religion and people converting to different faiths.
It's true. I might well put that as advancing your religion by the tip of the sword or the tip of the Spirit. And Christianity is centered on the idea of the work of the Holy Spirit, and what that translates to in human terms, the way we look at it, is it's all voluntary. It's all voluntary. It's not imposed.
Bob, we've got to go. He's got an appointment here that he's got to get to.
Care to close this out?
Yeah, well, I would like to with this. We've heard about your podcast. How frequent do you do your podcast? Sounds like very frequent.
I try and have it there Monday, Friday. This one means it's going to be later today. I haven't got to it yet. But Monday to Friday and Saturdays, I always try and do a thing it's called the week ahead. And I try to focus on things that are happening in the U.S. and in Canada and then internationally. And I tell people it's what's going on behind the scenes you need to be aware of.
Yeah,
that's how
StockwellDay.com.
StockwellDay.com is my site, and they can find the Israel documentary there. It's also on Spotify and YouTube. And Stockwell Day-to-Day News.
Okay, Day-to-Day News. So
Now, my content, that's the podcast. Yeah. So forgive me if I don't have as fancy production-wise as you do. It's being upgraded right now as we speak, but the content is there, and I get good feedback, and so.
And where in Canada do you live right now?
I live in British Columbia.
Okay, and how frequently are you in the United States?
Well, in the winter months, we have this strange sense that we are called to Florida.
Okay.
And we spend a fair bit of time, I mean, I'm back and forth because of my work out of Florida, but we sort of get down to Florida, end of November, and then I'm back and forth.
That's rough.
Through, it's rough. So we call Fort Lauderdale home. We really like Governor DeSantis, actually.
Yes,
I love his tax policies and other policies. But we are Canadian. We live in British Columbia. We have a little cottage in Alberta because all our grandkids are there, and we spend some of the tougher months. We escape to Florida.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for
And thank you,
Love to
sir.
have
Appreciate you coming out.
Anytime you're in Oklahoma again, we'd love to have you on the program.
This is a very welcoming state. We feel very much at home here.
When do you leave?
I'll leave you tomorrow morning.
All right,
Well, thank you all. Have a good day.
bye-bye.